Ken McBryde, over to you, please. I'll let you introduce yourselves because I gave students a brief overview this morning.
Okay.
So we'll get straight into it. Thank you.
So just want to thank you, Emma, for inviting me to be part of this little course. I really think, and from what I'm hearing on the street, it's a very good course and people are enjoying it. So, and I'm very pleased that we chewed the fat and talked about the upcoming project the students are doing. And that, I suppose, that idea of that project we're doing next is based on the fact that our time on this planet is very short and our time in our careers are even shorter. So I think as designers, me just reflecting here for your benefit, guys, we have to choose very carefully. If we want to make a difference in our short careers, we need to choose very carefully how and where and what mechanism we want to do that. How would you like to do that? And I think it's very important that that you understand that it helps to dream a little about how you would like to contribute to all our futures. To dream about your ideal job, to dream about your ideal project, and make a plan, be clear about it. The plans change, but at least please have a go, try, have a crack at your dreams. So I'm speaking to you here from the point of view of experience and a career of experience, which I've really enjoyed. And my intention in this lecture is that I hope to connect message with you as much as possible of what difference you could possibly make. But you know, you might look at your friends or you might look at professionals and, sorry about the background noise, our neighbour is mowing, I think. It's not the weekend, I wonder why he's mowing. Perhaps he's tuning up his engine. You need to make a bit of a plan for yourself. If you think you're, whoa, is this working all right?
Yes.
Can everyone hear me okay? All right, I'll just go a little louder maybe to...
Yeah, if you can crank yourself up.
Yeah, but you have to make your own luck, guys, is what I want to say. That's coming from experience. I used to race motorcycles, I still do. And when people win races, you think, oh, they're lucky. No, they've made their luck. And if you don't set your career up to make your luck, every move you make, then someone's right behind your back wheel and they're going to take it from you. So please think about that. And I also want to demystify the process of getting good jobs and doing good projects. And I think to do that, if I shared with you that I grew up in a little country town and I didn't hear the word architecture, I'd never met an architect, and I certainly didn't know what one did. I was learning about welding and brazing and melting joints and moulding techniques, bending, case hardening, heat treating, in a shed not too dissimilar to this one, by the way. I was building old motorcycles to race in the shed with my dad. But my mum convinced me that I should go to uni at the end of school. So I chose to do design. It was a 3-year course. I thought that'll be good. I'll get back into racing pretty fast. Of course, it ended up taking 5 years because I didn't realise at the time that architecture was a double degree. So 5 years later, it's like, oh dear, I'm getting old for this racing career. I better go to Europe to fast track it. That's when I saw architecture that really caught my attention. It was actually the Pompidou Centre that really fired me up. You could see all the pieces, like an old motorcycle. You see every little thing and what they do in that building. But more importantly, it had a big, tough, sloping piazza, a big gathering space in front of it, where there were always music and buskers and magicians and provocateurs, but homeless people. It was a public building. Homeless people can go inside the Pompidou Centre in the bitter months to keep warm. And you see them in there amidst mind-blowing exhibitions from all over the world. And it's like, okay, this is what I want to do. I want to be an architect. So I stopped the idea of wanting to be the next Mick Doohan, and I went to London and got a highly paid contract job and studied architecture properly, architects and architecture. And I made a list of my top 20, and the top four were in Paris. I saved up £3,000 working for a dodgy commercial firm because I figured I'd have to work for free and kind of start at the top, and I'd get knockbacks and I'd go down and down and down. Maybe I'd get to 15 and then I'd leapfrog my way back up. But at the top of the list was Renzo Piano. I'd done my homework. I discovered that he was the son of a builder, that he never employed an Aussie, that he employed people from all over the world. And I thought, okay, here's my chance. I'll rock up as this Aussie, a unique, and maybe I'll stand out enough to get a job. So, because I needed to stand out, I didn't have a folio full of experience. I hadn't spent my time off in offices working for architects. I was in the shed making motorbikes and racing. So I worked out that maybe instead of rocking up, and I wanted to practice, instead of turning up cold to Renzo Piano's office, I decided to start 3 down at Jean Nouvel. And I went to Jean Nouvel's office and I walked in shaking like a leaf and I said, can I please talk to Jean? No. I went, oh, fuck. I was a bit stumped. Can I have a job? No. And the person turned and walked away, and so did I. And I thought, all right, I need to work out how to ask questions that will generate a yes. And so I've done that. And I was about to push the button at Renzo Piano's office, and I freaked out. I walked down to the nearest bar and bought one of those strange, it's like 9 o'clock in the morning, I bought one of those strange, well, I'm shaking right now, reliving this, by the way. I bought one of those strange artichoke drinks, I think they're called chinar, that the old battle-scarred tradies drink at like 9 o'clock in the morning. There I was with them drinking one of these things to calm myself down. And I was really surprised when the girl standing at the end of the bar drinking a little espresso said, are you looking for a job at Renzo's? I'm like, what? How do you know that? You know, of course, I had my folio dressed up for an interview, and Renzo's office is like literally 10 meters away. And I was surprised she guessed it. But anyway, she gave me the tip of my lifetime. She said, you want to ask for Norio Cabby. He's doing the coolest projects. So it's like, right, don't ask for Renzo Piano. He's probably hardly there. It's in Genoa most of the time. So I had 2 more drinks, or another drink, and I went and pushed that button, like all chuffed. And when it actually opened, I was like, oh my God, like the door just went clunk, you know, those buzzy noises. And in I went up the stairs, and this very unimpressed receptionist, whose day I was clearly interrupting, I spoke to her and I said, may I leave my folio here, s'il vous plaît? And she went, je m'en fous, which I didn't know what it meant, but it didn't sound like non. I'd made more progress than Jean Nouvel's. And then I said, could you please ask, s'il vous plaît, that was my French at the time, could you ask Norio Cabby or tell him that I'd left my folio there? And she went, d'accord, which I didn't know what it meant, but it didn't sound like no. So off I went. The first thing she'd said is, I don't give a damn. And the second thing she'd said is, okay. Anyway, cut a long story short, I got interviewed by Nori and I got my job. And there I was working with Renzo, the son of a builder, in a shed, just like working with my dad. So that's where this little whirlwind talk starts. And the kind of practices I've worked for and the kind of jobs I've done, and maybe they've shed a little bit of light on the opportunities there are out there for you, depending on the kind of things you want to do. So I'm starting with the beginning of my career, which is possibly inverted compared to most. I started with the biggest project on earth. It was the Kansai International Airport, a 511-hectare island connected to Osaka on an artificial island by a 5-kilometre-long bridge. And I was asked by Nori, Shunji was in Genoa, to lead the team of the envelope structure and services on a 1.8-kilometre-long building at bloody 27 years old or 28. Unbelievable. Loved it. Now, we realised we were designing a building that was creating the first and last impressions of 100,000 people a day who visit Japan. So it's like, whoa, we took that seriously. The next really big project was when I was with Hassel, more recently, a 16.8 billion whatever, longest tunnels on earth, I don't know, just a huge WestConnex motorway project, WestConnex M4 and M5. The office had won it in a tender years before, actually well before I'd started. And suddenly there was architecture to be done and no one in the office wanted to do it. I certainly didn't want to work on roads. I thought we should have been working on jolly trains and metros and solar farms, what have you. But I discovered that these facilities were 30 meters high and took up whole blocks. So I thought, okay, we need to work out how to make this mongrel infrastructure sit in the urban fabric a little better. So after thinking about it, I came up with this little sketch for a really small team, talking about an office of 1,000 people, but we were terribly under-resourced. And so I needed a really clear diagram for everyone to understand what we were doing. And the idea was to take back a big fenced off site, create a green buffer and turn the buildings into the security that the client needed instead of a razor wire and all that. This is state infrastructure, it's got to be safe. So we created this compound where the buildings were the walls, we made windows into them so that it wasn't too frightening, this is what it looks like. And that it would change by day, that it would be lacy and play with the sky at night and be tied down to the ground with recycled bricks around the base. We didn't get our recycled bricks and they weren't assembled by robots, but otherwise I'm pretty happy. And by night we would invert that thing. We would celebrate the technology and the service areas and shine light on the concrete vent stacks. It should have been CLT, but they didn't want to do that either. There were multiple of these vent stacks. This one's sitting against the freeway at Underwood Road in Homebush. It's a very different shape, very different site, but it subscribes to exactly the same principles. Give back secure, fenced off site and turn it into parks and public domain. The next project I call extra large. It's only 2 billion on a 20 hectare site. And I was the appointed design leader of the building, the ICC, the one down the south there, the convention centre. And this is what it looked like after I'd finished. And the convention and the exhibition building, 23 trucks can bump in and bump out without being on the road. It's an astounding project that changes the way the city works. The west side of the city now is connected through to the CBD through this project. But what I really want to say to you here is I was a small cog in a big wheel. This is our team, a collaboration between Populous and Hassel. But these are the people we were talking to every day. Sorry, all those people. Astounding. So think about where you want to work. Do you want to play a big game in a big office, but be kind of safe in there and learn from a lot of people? Or do you want to go out and have a crack? It's horses for courses. We're all learning and moving. So the medium scale project I'd like to talk to you about was done by a very small studio. My team, Innovaci, we were 15 and we built an 80-story tower in Dubai. It came from a small project that we'd done in Australia with the same client. And our idea was to use traditional passive environmental techniques of the desert climate and make a transition structure at the base, which is a prefab timber shade structure. And that was an entry scale device and all that. A smaller project is, not as tall, but similar scale, was a collaboration again with a very small team. After 4 years at Hassel, I left with some young guys there and started Sydney Architecture Studio. It was a two-year gig to help them get going. And we were lucky enough to get invited to a design excellence competition for this project. Now, when you're a new practice, look out for this idea. Emerging practice is a tag that you as young people can call yourselves and get invited by big firms to enter City of Sydney Design Excellence Comps. They really favour established practices joining with emerging. In this case, we were invited as emerging and invited OMA out of Rotterdam to join us. Now, we lost that competition, a lot to be learnt there, we could do a lecture another day on competitions alone. Getting down to the smaller end of the scale, but things that start to really make an impact for me. On March 13 in 2015, Cyclone Pam, like a massive whippersnipper, walloped Vanuatu. 320-kilometre-an-hour winds flattened all their buildings and decimated 90% of their subsistence crops. That's crops they use for food and crops they use to rebuild their buildings after a cyclone. The sago palms and the like, gone. So these people were stuck without accommodation and no shelter and no chance of rebuilding for quite some time. So we got invited to come up with some Nakamal, Cat 5 rated community buildings that people can go into in the event of a cyclone. Now, this is another lecture in itself. We learned a lot here. And these, I want to clarify, these are not Cat 5 rated buildings. The structures are, but the entire structure isn't, and that's being addressed. But they're prefabricated, flat pack buildings, take 5 days to build, each used for school buildings, clinics, nurses' quarters, and community buildings. The next stage was about Cat 5 housing. Now, communication is a really big deal in architecture, and I'm not talking about language, I'm talking about ideas. How do you communicate them? And models is a very powerful tool. And when we talk in our studio here about animation, I think you guys call it entourage, the placement of people and stuff in your models and your designs is a key part of the narrative in which you're trying to get across. I couldn't speak a word near Vanuatu, but I'm pretty sure these people got the idea that we would provide half a house for them that was Cat 5 cyclone rated, and the other half would be built in their traditional method with sago palm and the like that blows away. So at the end of the building, they go inside there in a cyclone, the rest blows away, doesn't hurt anyone, but the frames are Cat 5 rated. Now, that project to me really means something. That changes the way these people can live. There's no Cat 5 structures in Vanuatu. There's no memory of a Category 5 cyclone. They've never had one before. So this is, the world is changing, and we architects need to think about how we can help. Now I'm going to talk about extra small, or just extra small project that started from the basis of habitat protection. I bummed myself along on a trip that I wasn't invited to look at doing transects of the red pandas. They're a threatened species because their habitat is threatened by the farmers in the cloud bands, cloud forests of Nepal. I think it's between 2,500 meters and about 4,000 is a particular, really wet forest, as you can see. Anyway, we spent 2 weeks tramping around, tracking red pandas, and while it was a trip of zookeepers and vets and stuff, but what I was actually looking at was, while they were all looking out the window at animals and stuff, I was looking at infrastructure and looking at how these people were using a shovel in a really efficient way. I'd never seen that before. And I was considering the risks we were taking in these vehicles going up into these steep foothills of Nepal. And I was fascinated by these people who seem to have, the locals seem to have gold gum boots. I never got to the bottom of that, but I love my gold gum boots now. They weren't painted, but I want some. But anyway, these are the trees they're hacking down that the red pandas live in to make fires that are super inefficient. We'll talk about that another day. But here's the architecture that caught my eye. And I've spoken about this before, something I really like when it comes to prefabrication. The top of this building is what Kenneth Frampton would call product form. The bottom of it is place form. So the locals are laying the rocks based on the context, but the stuff up above is universal, comes from anywhere. You see it here again. How cool is that little building? And the local trades, how they build and hold stuff down in the wind. That they had an emerging prefabrication industry, cottage industry, how tidy their sites were. These are the things I was looking at. The buildings were all, decorated in this little nuanced way, just the barges. But the construction methodology, these are quite short people actually, the construction methodology methodology breaks down when you get too high. They can't reach the rocks up there and pack the mud in between the rocks well enough, and so they fall down. Now, I have another photograph of these lovely people in whose house we were invited to drink funny milk and mess around, around fires and stuff. That's where I saw the inefficiency of the fires. But these people are about half as high as I am, by the way. So that I'm only saying that because of that construction shot I showed before, and you'll see why it's important in a minute. A few months after I got back from 2 weeks in Nepal, the 7.8 Richter earthquake walloped Kathmandu, and soon after another one right in the region of Solokhumbu, where we had been. Solokhumbu is a foothills of Mount Everest. It's the Sherpa country. And 9,000 people were injured, killed, 22,000 injured, 1 million buildings gone, 700 of which were schools. And this is where my extra small project starts. An engineer called David Carolyn called me up and said, mate, instead of us donating money, let's donate our smarts, let's contribute. So cut a long story short, a group of us got together pro bono while I was at Hassel, and we started developing an idea. And it was on the basis of the Australian Himalayan Foundation, which is founded by the son of Edmund Hillary, who asked Sherpa Tenzing, who helped Edmund get to the top of Mount Everest. On the way down, Edmund is reportedly to have asked Sherpa, what can I do to help you? And he said, help our children see, which gives me goosebumps. So the Australian Himalayan Foundation, the Solokhumbu district, was looking after 350 schools. 270 of them were destroyed. They were trying to help the people see, the children see. And you can see the failure here of these buildings. Low down, the construction is quite okay. Up high, it's not. These rocks fell and killed children, many of them. And when we committed to this project, we didn't know we would come across all these difficulties. We were doing this job for free. We learned a lot. And we saw, I'll talk to you a little bit about the inversion of place form to an imitation of product form, quite amusing. But now, at the end of the project, the schools have been replaced for Australian Himalayan Foundation. They don't want to build anymore, that's not their business. And so now we're working on the process of sharing the technology we came up with, which I'll show you in a minute. This is a really short lecture, and I forgot to check the time. I'm out of time, so I'm going to whip through, and this is being recorded. You can read this later, but I'm going to ask you to check out the TED Talk by Michael Murphy. He develops the idea of Kenneth Frampton's about product and place form. He calls it OFAB and prefab. Great talk. But basically what I set out to do, and again, another guiding sketch to lead the team, is to adopt what I what I learned by tramping around in Nepal, looking at red pandas, and came up with an idea for a system for schools that was modular, that met the bureaucracy, the school system, and that would create placemaking in the villages in which we were delivering these. Now, we were working in areas that you can't even get a four-wheel drive vehicle into, so we developed a prefab system that's very conventional, in fact. And we took a lot of things for granted, you know, like when you unload a truck for prefab, that you'd unload it in a way that you would, the truck was loaded in the order in which you needed the things. But all these lovely people were very excited, and they scattered the bits all over the paddock. And so it took a long time to build these. We didn't realize they didn't know what a drawing was, or the idea of respecting it. We didn't realize that, of course, there were no trade skills at all, and no one explained that with lightweight structure, if you don't put a screw in, it doesn't work, because they're just learning from their grandfathers and grandmothers how to build. This is volunteers on site and TTW taking photographs where everyone's feet are behind a pile of dirt. Guess why? They don't have any boots on. Anyway, here are the school buildings nearly finished. Here are the kids loving it. And look how they've painted our beautiful stone, locally laid stone, which stops these buildings blowing away in the wind, by the way. That's why it's there, apart from my architectural desires. They painted it to be kind of product form, a mass-produced brick. I found that very amusing. Anyway, at the same time, there was much formality and excitement. Oh, did I just... What's happened? Did my screen still work? No. What's happening there? You can hear me? You can see? Oh, good. My screen just went away.
Just can't see your face.
Yeah. So can you tell me? Anyway, cut a long story short, at the same time that the last screws were going into the last of the 20 or so buildings, we got 5 Good Design Awards in the Sydney Opera House. But the thing that is more important to me is Panema, who was a student at the time, saw this happening in her village, joined the rebuild project and committed to go and do engineering after seeing what we had done. That's the thing that makes this project worthwhile to me. But even more importantly, one of the parents said to us that after the earthquakes, they've all been absolutely freaking out, but now they know sending their children to school is the safest place those children can be. And that touches my heart too. Extra small, last one, really fast. It's about communication and learning. And when I went into this very remote, very rundown village of Jiltnigan on the Roper River in remote Northern Territory, what I learned, the solution was not about architecture, it was about safety. And that safety, the importance of the safety was a result of punishing drugs and alcohol abuse and violence in the community. So what we came up with an amazing woman called Kelly Wright, the one in the bottom left of this image, she's a hairdresser from Bondi. She dreamt up a thing called Deciding to Make a Difference. She can't understand why Aboriginal kids don't get the same chance as her kids in Bondi. So that's what the project's about. We learned from these people, spending a couple of days talking to them. Takes a while to build up trust, that we needed to build something, we called it healing on country. We've built a little universal home off the community, 5 k's away, where families can go to rebuild. And the idea there is that they will experience this little home, they'll understand what I'm talking about when we talk about full height louvers, they'll understand what I talk about when we talk about privacy, because I know from experience, it's another lecture for another day. Communication is a very tricky thing. So our idea is to build a full-scale home, full-scale prototype, let the families experience it, then tell us what they actually need. So that's where we finish up. And my practice, my experience is constantly evolving, and it's heavily influenced by the people I work with. I like it that way. Everything I've learned from bright young people around me. And currently we're formulating this lovely thinking around the architectural physics logo, which I think you can possibly see is somehow an A and a P, but in a way it's also my young team here, Troy and Dan, have helped me realize that it's something like one of the projects we're doing where we plant a seed, where it grows, it evolves, and we end up with a forest that's communicating of people, of projects, we're seeding ideas, and we'll keep going. Thank you very much. Happy for questions.
Thank you, Ken. Lovely presentation, and like you were saying, you know, projects with heart, right? Setting that foundation of caring as a premise to your practice and to what you put out in the world is really important. So that was lovely. I'm just thinking that we might hold on questions and allow Kate to present and then join in a discussion with the two of you afterwards, if that's okay.
Yeah.
How's your PDF, Kate?
Apologies, I was muted. It's all good. I'll just move across. And hopefully that's working. Hopefully you guys can see my screen now.
Yes, it's in Acrobat mode. Did you want to go to full screen?
Yes, I will do that. Hang on a sec. Will you allow me to? It's being a bit of a pest. How's that? Okay. I think after listening to Ken, we may have some similarities in our background. I also grew up in rural Australia, in the mid-north of South Australia, just below the Flinders Ranges on a sheep station where my family still are. And my journey to becoming a landscape architect and then a studio director was never something that I had envisaged as a young person growing up. We lived 50 kilometres out of town. It was a nice long bus ride to and from school every day, but I did all of my primary school and most of my high school at this tiny little school. The entire school was 200 children. That was from preschool through to year 12. And it meant that year 11 and 12 was a bit limited, and that mostly the subjects were by remote education. So luckily my parents shipped me off to Adelaide, and I finished year 11 and 12 in Adelaide. So there was a massive transition from being a little sort of bush kid to suddenly living quite close to the centre of Adelaide and really having a very urban lifestyle in a boarding house with a bunch of other girls. But it opened my eyes to a huge sort of realm of career possibilities that I didn't even know existed. And one of them being landscape architecture. We had an amazing careers advisor at my high school who interviewed each of us in year 11 and asked us what we wanted to do. When I said I wanted to be a chef, she said, well, that's, you know, really interesting, tough career choice. What else do you like? And she said, you know, chefs work really long hours. It's very hard to have kind of social and family life as a chef. And she helped me find landscape architecture, and she actually got me some work experience with a firm in Adelaide. And I loved it, and that was it. And I said to them, where would you study? Where would you recommend going to study landscape architecture? And they said, RMIT in Melbourne, it's the best. So following their advice, I applied to RMIT, got in through their crazy interview process, and had an amazing 4 years living in Melbourne. And then I guess at the time of graduation, we were coming into the recession Australia had to have. So there wasn't a lot of work opportunities, and particularly in Victoria. So it was leave or not get a job, essentially. So I left. Initially, I had a 4-month stint in Kuala Lumpur, where my partner had, from the time, had moved, because there was still some work over there. That quickly dried up, and from there I was left a little bit stranded and thinking where to next. I was thinking about Hong Kong, and I met someone from Hong Kong who said it's pretty hard on a student graduate salary to survive in Hong Kong unless you know some people and you can, you know, share their house. And so I decided to come to Sydney instead, and really didn't look back. I was lucky enough to get a great job at Hassel, spent a couple of years there. And then my old uni friend from RMIT was starting this new office called Aspect Studios, and said, hey, do you want to come and work with me? And I went, sure. And that was the beginning of a really interesting process. And we're 22 years into this journey that is the Aspect Sydney practice, which I think I'll talk to you a little bit about. And 22 years in one company was, again, never my intention. As a young graduate, I thought I would travel the world and work in lots of different practices. I think the reason I haven't worked in lots of different practices is because the Sydney studio has never been the same thing for long. It has changed constantly, and it has always felt like a new thing is happening and a new thing is happening. This funny little timeline is my way of diagramming the growth in numbers in our studio of male and female employees of the studio. And that's something that's been really important to me, creating a place where women have equal opportunity and men have equal opportunity to be involved in life outside work. So by that, I mean supporting men to take care of responsibilities and making it possible for them at work to do that. So you can kind of see we were tiny when we began. It was initially Sasha and I and a student, and then another student and another student. We grew a little bit. We grew a little bit more. It was always very organic. We just sort of thought, oh, we're getting a bit busier, we might need another person. We're a bit busier, we might need another person, etc. And so it just gradually came along. We hit a scale, we had to shift scale at one point where we'd won an enormous project, and I'll talk to you about that and the impact on the office of suddenly winning a really big project and how that changes how you organise yourself. And from that point on, we were in a different league. We were no longer just a little studio. We were now able to take on projects of any scale. And I guess what that meant for us was now we have to choose. What kinds of projects do we want to do? What kinds of projects do we want to say no to? And how do we politely do that and still maintain existing client relationships? Because we really have had a practice that's evolved from very tight client relationships. For a long time, we were a pretty small firm, and so clients got used to working one-on-one with the directors on all of the projects, and they like that. But you can't continue to do that forever. If there's only 2 directors, you can't spread yourselves that thin that all the clients feel like they're having that same level of attention on every project. So you have to elevate other people in the studio to a position where they're the ones who are giving the client that experience and delivering the projects. When we began, there were, everything was secondhand. We were the sort of the first branch of Aspect beyond the mothership being the first studio that opened in Melbourne. And so we received, gratefully, a couple of secondhand computers and a fax machine. We made some tables, and we were in a shared office space in Wentworth Avenue, which has since become very well known as a place that fostered the careers of all kinds of well-known designers in Sydney. And we had a very happy time in that shared space, and we learnt a lot from the experienced people around us. It was a range of architects and landscape architects and a lighting engineer. And so being new, you know, I'd had 2 years prior experience at Hassell, and luckily at Hassell we worked on something super fast paced. So I saw it from concept through doco to construction in those 2 years. And that gave me the confidence to be able to go out and work on projects where there was no one else to, you know, seek advice from, other than the kind people around the studio who I would pepper with questions constantly. And in those early days, the main way we won projects was through public tenders. And as an emerging practice, that's common, that you chase every public tender with vigour. And we certainly won our first public tender by underestimating the volume of work and therefore putting in a fee that was far too low. So clients loved us. We'd promised the world for this tiny fee, and then we over-delivered on what we'd promised because we were so excited to have won this first public project, which was supposed to be a master plan for a walk, a clifftop walk. And the master plan should have included diagrams, maps, and some indicative details of the boardwalk, and that would then enable the council to get funding for the next phase of the project, which would be to produce all of the documentation from which they would then tender and build the thing. We went to town, we just loved the project. We went to site so many times, we took lots of photos, we analysed the place in a lot of detail, and then we did a whole lot of very place-specific drawings and cross sections, and we designed seats and lookouts. All of this was well beyond the scope, packed it all into this design report and handed it over, and then we're waiting for them to call and say, please give us a fee for the next phase. They didn't call, and eventually we asked, you know, what's happening with the next phase? And they said to us, well, your initial report was so detailed, we just gave it to a D&C contractor and they're going to build it. So we just very naively did ourselves out of probably another 6 months of work and fees through our enthusiasm. And I think it's an important lesson for young practices because so many people do that just through enthusiasm and a little bit of naivety, over deliver and then do themselves out of the next phase of work. Anyway, we learnt a lot about Sydney and particularly about this incredible piece of coastline by walking up and down and mapping it and so on. Our next project was really, again, one where the architects took a chance on us. We we've not built anything. We had zero proven experience. And they were the architects responsible for delivering a new Chinese consulate for Sydney. So that was a pretty important role. But it was on a reasonably tight budget, which is why they were looking for a landscape architect who was cost effective. Again, being slightly naive, we underpriced the work and then proceeded to document in great detail all kinds of things beyond our scope, like water features, which, you know, you learn by doing these things once. Oh, actually, we should be trying to, you know, say that's not in our scope. That's the responsibility of the water feature consultant. Don't you have one? Rather than go off as a young landscape architect and do a whole lot of research and then document a water feature, which is what we did. But this was our first experience of working in a multidisciplinary team. And that was a huge learning curve, very valuable, a very well-managed process by the architects. And so again, this time we were working as, you know, a part of a bigger team, and we could observe the process and learn how the architects were managing us and what did we like about how they were managing us and what didn't we like. So what would we improve on so that when we were in the position of managing something, we might do it differently. We also started doing, you know, all kinds of fun projects. Anytime there was an opportunity for a temporary project, we'd go for it. This one was our demonstration that, you know, the role of cars in cities has been too dominant, and we wanted to see more space, which is currently for cars given back for open space. And so we turned a car into a park by literally wrapping it in turf. It was a popular piece in these temporary projects. It ended up in the newspaper, and the former owner of the car, so we had a $30,000 budget each person for these projects. The former owner of the car contacted us and said she was very unhappy to see how we disrespected her beautiful car by covering it in grass, which was pretty funny because she'd sold the car and we bought it from a wrecker. Anyway, it's interesting to see how people are attached to their cars even after they've sold them. Again, in those early days where we were very keen to test new things, something that's been, I suppose, an abiding value of our practice is to not be limited by current technology, but to try and find new ways of doing things. We won a commission at Sydney Olympic Park after the Olympics. There was a series of public art projects and commemorative projects. And we won one of them, which was to commemorate sporting events to be held there after the Olympics. And it was supposed to be a series of plaques. And so plaques there would be, which you can see in these darker colours, but we wanted it to be much more memorable and engaging than a line of plaques that were supposed to be on the ground. We wanted it to be a beautiful walkway that drew people in, that encouraged them to come and read the information on the plaques, because most people would walk straight past a plaque without even acknowledging it. So we did some research and found that there was a company in New Zealand that would hand make glass. They are glass suppliers and they make in all kinds of beautiful colours. And we worked with them to understand how it needed to be made, how we could light it from the sides, etc. This was a very experimental project for us. Certainly a lot of lessons learned, a few things that didn't go so well. But it ran quite happily for about 5 years before the lights failed, and then it got too expensive for the lights to be replaced. And so I don't think the lights turn on at all anymore. We also started to get some commissions for private houses. Again, it's not something our practice has done much of, but from that we learned an appreciation of detailing and materiality that we've tried to carry on to public projects as well. After those early days in the shared studio, we moved into a different studio space in Surrey Hills. Initially with 2 other little companies, they both grew and moved out. And so we were able to grow into and have our own space for the first time. It was probably a good size for about 25 people. So in that time when we grew from 15 to 43, we got to the point where we were really on top of each other. And it was becoming a little tricky to work. We loved the space though, because it was an old warehouse. So we had beautiful natural light and windows that opened, and it had great atmosphere. So for a long time, we resisted leaving. Eventually, though, we had to. The other thing that happened in 2014 is we're invited to join a team that were bidding for a rail project. So we did our very first bid for a rail project. It was like a toe in the water to infrastructure. That bidding team didn't win, so that was fine. But from that experience, we thought there is really an opportunity to do public transport better, and we started to develop an interest in what that might mean for us as landscape architects. How would we do public transport better? So then we joined another team that was bidding on the Sydney Light Rail project, and the consortia we were in won, and it suddenly meant that we needed a team of 15 landscape architects just to work on one project, which was a very big shift for us, because I think at the time we were 35 people. So to have 15 people on one project was like growing the studio by a third again. And it meant we had to make all kinds of big decisions. The rest of the people working on the project were predominantly engineers. They were all going to be in one big shared office, all 500 of them, over a couple of floors. We decided that didn't suit our culture. We didn't want to be stuck in an office with 500 engineers. We wanted to stay in our own studio and spend time with them to enable us to do all of the coordination you need to do on a big project like that. And I think that was a really important decision for us to make, and we had to defend it quite hard because pretty much everyone else moved into the shared office except us. We were there every workday for meetings. Sometimes I would have spent 4 to 6 hours a day in that space, but the other hours I was back in our studio, and it was such a lovely environment in our studio. There was no way I wanted to move into these massive office plates of grey, partitioned, felt like little cubby holes full of unhappy engineers. So it was always a relief to get out of that environment and get back to our studio and do design thinking in the space that was suited to design thinking. We delivered a range of projects, and we also started to get really interested in water and the role of water in the environment and our role in helping make sure that water is better used and better harnessed. And this was one of the first wetland projects we worked on. We started to deliver some really interesting and smaller scale public spaces. And funnily enough, back to the original client, we got a different stage of Clifftop Walk. This time, we were very careful about how we put the fees together and how we delivered on the scope in a staged manner so that we didn't do ourselves out of any work. And that was another really interesting project for us. Again, we did some temporary projects. This was in a laneway in the city. And for us, this was about testing how do you transform somebody's experience of a laneway from a back service space to a place of fun, a place where the material is stretchy and unexpected and you can push against it and really think about how you move through the city in a different way. We also started to do some strategic work for the City of Sydney, which is another way of having a really interesting effect on the work of lots of people over a very long period of time. As you can see, we did this back in 2010. The document still exists, still influencing projects within the City of Sydney's LGA. So it's been, for us, a really important piece of work. We also delivered projects in that time like Darling Quarter, which for me was a personal favourite, a project I spent many, many hours on doing the research and the detailed design to deliver what was at the time Sydney's first water play space. We also started to get involved in the design of schools, which was a very important piece of work for the studio and something that we continue to evolve our thinking around. Skipping along a little bit, we eventually got to the point with the space in Surrey Hills where we really felt like it was too small, and it was starting to affect our ability to deliver work in the way we wanted to, because it was hard to have clients over for meetings. We had one tiny meeting room And having clients over to our space is really important to us. We want them to understand how we work, to see and respect how we work, actually, and to allow us time to be creative. So getting them to come to our studio rather than always going to their office for meetings is a big part of that. And on the whole, we've found once they've been to our studio once, they're very happy to come back, because it's usually a very different environment to the corporate spaces that they're in. We also grew a little bit more during this time. So we're up to about 55 people. And up until then, we didn't have much of a structure to the way the office worked. There was just a big group of people, some team leaders delivering some projects, and 2 studio directors. We'd have weekly meetings at the start of the week to plan, but that was about as organised as we got. But at this scale, that sort of organisation was not appropriate, and we had to change how we set ourselves up to make sure not only were we managing projects well, but people were having an opportunity to develop their careers, and that their needs as young designers were being recognised, and they were given project opportunities to expand their skill sets. I think at this point also we'd realised, and for me it was the light rail project that did it, that you have to be super proactive if you want to be an influential designer. You really have to be comfortable with putting yourself into positions in meetings where people are going to look at you strangely. You have to challenge them. And sometimes you have to challenge yourself. You have to recognise where you don't have knowledge about something and ask others to put you in the right direction. But also you have to be clear about what you stand for. And for us, it was about standing for the role of public space and about protecting the environment. And you can imagine on some of these bigger scale projects, the environment gets often put to the side because people are focused on delivering a big piece of infrastructure. So fighting to retain existing trees and things like that is not something the engineers were particularly interested in, but for us it was very important. So what does a structure for maybe 55 people look like? That was something we tested, and we've tried a few different models, and it shifts and changes over time. We've realised that team size, for example, so what we have is a leadership group that shares the decision making. We have an admin team that does all kinds of essential work to support the design teams. The design teams then are smaller groups. And the reason we set up smaller groups of say 7 to 9 people is we think that that nice intimate group is a good way to get to know your colleagues and to be able to work closely together. It means this team is responsible for a range of projects. They have leadership that can make decisions about the projects, check in with the studio leaders about issues and design decisions, and get support as they're needed to deliver all kinds of really interesting projects. And the other thing that we think about when we're putting a team together is who are the people in the team? What skill sets do they have? Are they complementary? Every one of these teams is like a little part of an ecosystem. A studio really is an ecosystem of people with complementary skills. Not everybody is an all-rounder, of course. So you need to be thinking about that person's got really strong 3D skills. That person's got really strong documentation skills. This one has really strong planting knowledge. They'll be a really good cohesive team if they're all together, etc. Or someone else is an excellent verbal communicator, blah, blah, blah. So you need to really think about how teams are put together. We also found that sometimes we have projects that are too big to be managed by one team, and therefore the team structure might include a couple of people from another team, or someone has expertise in one team that another person needs. So it's a very free-flowing kind of way of operating, but what is maintained is that sense of belonging to a smaller group, and I think that's something that our staff really cherish. They really feel proud of the teams that they're in, and they really talk to us with a lot of, I guess, pride and joy about the achievements of their team, And I think that's really important in an office of bigger numbers like ours. So I'll just quickly flick, because I'm mindful of time. We've delivered a range of interesting projects then through that team structure, like sharing knowledge about how to build, how to design across those teams, sometimes winning things through a competition, sometimes through a direct commission. This was the light rail as through a big consortia bid. And some very interesting and bespoke approaches to different projects like play have been achieved through that time as well. I wanted to talk briefly then in terms of finishing about the broader aspect group. As mentioned, Sydney was the second office. The first office was in Melbourne, and Melbourne is still the home of the executive team. So over the years, what has evolved that aspect is that we've decided we like being landscape architecture focused studios, and it works well to have a studio per state of Australia. Approximately 12 years ago, we opened a studio in Shanghai, which has grown and established to a good sort of 40-person sized office. And we've recently branched out into other countries as well. But what's important about this is that it means each studio operates in their local market. So the Sydney team focuses on work in New South Wales, the Melbourne team in Victoria, etc. Occasionally there are times where the Sydney team might have a client in Melbourne. So we might start a project in Melbourne and then hand it over to our Melbourne team to deliver, or vice versa. But more recently, what we've started to evolve is how we draw on our collective resources and how we work in what we call a one studio manner. And sometimes we do that to draw expertise from different people. Sometimes it's about getting numbers so you can deliver on a bigger project. And an example of that is the Perth studio were given a project to run. The Melbourne team won a design competition with through a fast process. So they did a plan and some sexy renders, won a competition. Then they had to deliver. And the site was in Abu Dhabi. And none of us had ever delivered a project in Abu Dhabi before. It was in partnership for the next phase with Oricon, who are a large multidisciplinary and engineering focused firm who do have people on the ground in Abu Dhabi. So the Perth team at the time were 4 people, and the project was enormous. So there was no way that 4 people could deliver the project. So what the Perth guys did is look at the master plan and work out how it could be partitioned up into pieces of work that people from other studios could contribute to, with them managing it. So essentially they were the design and project managers, and people from the Adelaide studio did 2 components of the project. The Sydney team did 1 component of the project, and from Melbourne we have a graphics and wayfinding team who designed signage for the project. How we did that is interesting because it set us up for working remotely during COVID. So we've been using Teams software in our studio for a little while, and this is an example of how we work on Teams. So someone will be developing some initial ideas, post it on Teams. The design manager will check, review, comment, give us back responses, things that we need to consider based on conversations they've been having. We'll post things as they evolve. This is an initial idea, now tested in 3D, starting to evolve in detailing, etc. These are just a couple of snapshots of how the process works. And then we have online meetings as a team once a week. So in that way, we've managed to deliver this very enormous park upgrade. It's an existing park in Abu Dhabi that was designed and completed about 10 years ago, but hasn't really become a place that's well loved and well used. So the competition was to transform this into something that had a lot more clarity around how you move through the park, a lot of a lot more activities to do, but also improvements to the microclimate, so people could use the park for a longer period of the year because the weather is so extreme in Abu Dhabi. So in the end, what happened is, and you can't really see, but there's a series of play spaces. The Adelaide office designed the play spaces. The Sydney office designed the water play space. Perth took care of all of the master plan scale moves and all of the coordination with the other consultants. And the wayfinding and signage team designed a wayfinding signage package. There was also a really interesting collaboration with Bureau Happold, who you may have heard of, who are an international specialist engineering firm who have a division that does microclimate modelling. They sent a team to Abu Dhabi who took all kinds of climate measurements, humidity, temperature, wind speed, etc., in various places around Abu Dhabi, and then proposed types of considerations to the design team, things to be aware of, and then we could then take into account when we were designing things like shade structures. So the difference between designing a shade structure in Australia and designing a shade structure in Abu Dhabi, for example, is at night what you want to make sure of is that the ground surface, which is warmed up during the day, is radiating that heat back at night. So letting that hot air escape out. So you don't want a shade structure that has any kind of continuous surface that holds the hot air in. Likewise, during the day, how do you arrange the angle of the shade elements so that it bounces the maximum amount of light and UV off so that not too much is hitting the ground. So these are kind of more technical considerations that they could bring to the team, and then we could take that into account. And also the role of water and how you position it in the landscape relative to prevailing breezes to again help cool the landscape, how you might think about irrigation of plants, again, as a mechanism for introducing water during the day. So these are the kinds of considerations that they brought to the project, which were very interesting for us. And I just popped in a couple of the renders so you can see kind of this is where we ended up with the design of a bespoke play element that has some self-shading components to the design, a big water play space completely under the cover of this shade canopy, etc. And it was really interesting to work on the project in that way. And for me, it was a good way of having a toe in the water, literally, of a bigger project without having to have the responsibility for managing the entire thing. And I think vice versa for the Perth studio of 4 people who were managing it. It was really nice to know they had these super capable teams in the other states who were doing high quality work and then giving it to them to essentially compile and present to the client. So for us, that's a really effective way of working. And something that we can use again on smaller scale projects or within Australia only. So I wanted to just finish up by saying the way that we work is really fundamental to us. And we moved from Surrey Hills to Redfern, from a beautiful old warehouse in Surrey Hills to a really not so old but equally beautiful space in Redfern. Yes, you might recognise this person here working very hard. And we chose this space because it has sort of 2 halves. It's a sawtooth roof, level 1 of an old building. And under that sawtooth roof, the toilets and the kitchen are in the centre. So it subdivides it into 2 sort of long rectangular spaces. One half of the office is full of tables and chairs and computers, so the workstations, I suppose. And this is where our teams sit. And you can see that there's no division, and this is how teams work together. So they literally just look around the computer screen to talk to each other, or in a lot of places we've tried to separate and create peepholes and gaps through so you can have conversations crossways. So your team is probably 1, 2, 3 rows in that circumstance. But the other side of the studio, there's no computers unless you bring your laptop over. It's big open area with meeting rooms at either end. And it's space for all kinds of things, making models, drawing on big pieces of paper, pinning things up and talking, etc. And we thought we were completely reliant on this way of working until COVID happened. We thought we needed to be face-to-face around pieces of paper and models to do good work. We've learnt we can do all of that collaboration online through that prior method I mentioned of Teams, of having lots and lots of conversations and posting and sharing stuff as it's developed. So it's been very interesting for us in these last 6 months to shift from a very paper-based way of working to a completely paper-free way of working on the whole. We do now have a few people who have moved back into the studio and, like myself, are working there several days a week because I missed it. I love it. It's a really nice environment. But one thing that's changed for sure is that we're never going to print the volume of paper that we did in the past. I think I'll stop. Otherwise, I'll just be rambling. So I think it's nice to.
Oh, I think this is
good point.
Well timed. I've actually used the photo of the Aspect Studio in several slides for this course, just because I guess a picture tells a lot about the culture and a work environment. And for those looking out for work, you know, your environment and how it inspires and gets you creative is really important. And I'm not prioritizing, but like Aspect have got a fantastic studio space and culture set up. I can let you know that if you've got any more details or any more questions. But as a bit of a wrap up, thank you so much, Kate, to map a pretty amazing evolution of your practice, but also taking us through quite a tangible way of understanding the kind of scales of practice and how they relate to the scales of projects, because I think that's something that's really kind of come out of the first body of work that the students have done. What does a studio of 4 people get to do, you know, and how do they go about doing the work? So I'd love to open it up to questions from the students, and if there's anything that I can add into it, I've got a few questions at the end. But over to you, Archie-Prac. Have you got questions?
I have a question for Kate. Hi.
Hi.
I was wondering whether, I guess particularly working on bigger projects with architects and other consultants, do you find that landscape architecture is not always the priority, and how do you manage that, like particularly being quite a successful business, even in terms of fees and the value?
Good question. And it is a good indicator, I think, of when someone was educated as to how they think about landscape architects. Because I think in more recent years of architectural education, people have at uni learned about landscape architecture as their equal partner. But in prior years, definitely architecture was given kind of this privileged status, and all other consultants were seen as supporting to the grand vision that the architect would come up with. So we certainly work with some architects who are very interested in achieving great outcomes that are holistic for a project. And that's always the relief, because you don't have to fight with them. But when we work with architects who see the building as the main thing and everything else is secondary, it's a lot harder. And we have to really go in and fight and advocate. And it can be, you know, really well-known international architecture practices that still have that attitude, that the building is the only thing that should be prioritised and everything around it is secondary. The good thing about working in Australia is our local planning and local council systems are pretty strong. Like, our design quality expectations are high, and councils really want a good quality public domain outcome around whatever the building is. So they will typically, if there is an architect who seems to be prioritising the building only, the council and the planning authorities speak up and they say, where's the public domain design? Where's the work of the landscape architects? We want to see an integrated result. But for us, it has meant that on another one of your questions was around fees. We are never on an equal standing with architects in terms of fees, and that's really frustrating because often we have to do work in a very multidisciplinary way. Like, to achieve a good outcome in the public domain, you've got to make it work with the civil engineers, the guys doing the stormwater, the lighting designers, EDA consultants. You've got to work with everybody to get a good result. You can't just stay over here and say, I'm just designing the landscape. It doesn't work like that. So it does take a lot of collaborative effort to get a good result. And often that is not recognised in the setting of budgets and fees. Often clients will allocate, you know, an enormous amount of budget to the building, a very small amount to the public domain. But for that very small amount of money, we still have to deliver a super high level of service. So it's rarely a balanced outcome. But it is improving. I think that in the 20 odd years I've been practicing, we are starting to get better fees. I don't know that it'll ever, match the level of fees that architects will get, but it's improving.
On that, one of my questions is, how do you know what fee to charge? Where do you look? So you've got the various institute advices, but
Ken, the dark art of writing fees. I guess we have a few ways of doing it. So our institute, the Australian Institute of Landscape Architects, provides a fee schedule, which is helpful, and it's a guide to your budget range and then a percentage base. So we use that. That's a good measuring stick. But we found about 5 years ago that people were throwing it out the window and all our competitors were no longer using it and their fees were much lower. So it's only a useful guide if everyone's using it. Typically what we do is try and look at square metres of public domain times a couple of different construction values, like square metre rates, to arrive at a budget if the client hasn't given us one. And then what should our fees be as a percentage of that budget is one measuring stick. The other is to plan out the process and to look at, here's the program, here's the deliverables, this is how many people we're going to need working on the project. So what's our cost of delivering that? When we do that, we usually end up with a pretty high number. If you think about how many people are going to be working on something for how long, you usually arrive at quite a high number. The budget percentage-based style of arriving at fees is usually a bit lower. And so somewhere in the middle is normally where we set our fees. But it's not easy. And Ken, I'm keen to hear your
Ken, I was about to ask.
Fascinating. The first architect I ever did meet in my country town sat me down at lunchtime. He was short of work and he proceeded to show me all his holidays and his big sailing boat. And he was telling me how much he enjoyed being an architect. At that time, as Kate mentioned, there was a schedule of fees. And essentially, I think even before the schedule of fees was introduced, before my time, architecture fees were 6% fixed. Like the generations before me, that's what it was, 6%. And now 6% of a big project is a truckload of money. And yes, you end up with a nice big sailing boat and lots of holidays. Now, I'm sorry to say that in my career, projects have become bigger, larger, more complex, and we do less and less of them for less and less money. How do you pick a fee? Well, it's going to be extremely hard now because of COVID. When we went through the global financial crisis, fees came right down because architects and designers generally were trying to survive. And so they dropped their fees ridiculously. Well, guess what? They've never come back. And guess what? It's happening again. I know there are architects around doing work for free in the hope of getting a commission out the back end, like concept of DA or something, actually giving their ideas away for free to try and get some work for their staff. So how do you pick a fee in that context? Well, you choose extremely carefully which jobs you're going for, and you choose very carefully the client asking you to work, and you find out what it is they're after. If fees are the deciding factor, run a mile, because there's also a lot of research around. I think the CSIRO has done it, the Institute has done it. The lower the fees, the lower the design fees, the more expensive the building will be out the back end. People make mistakes, and builders have got to fix them, and clients have got to pay for them. So it's a fast path to nowhere, fee cutting. But having said that, the projects we work on now, we can do with very small teams because we have such powerful software. So if you can get efficient and use the technology that we have, there's a way of doing good work for less fees than we used to when we had big teams of people with slow computers or drawing by hand, for example. So it's a very, very tricky and vexed question. I would say the best way to pick a fee is find someone who values what you do.
Yeah, I also had a question.
Could I give some practical advice, Emma?
Yes.
Generally, in an architect, in a
Sure.
construction project, in a building project, total consultant fees might be around 11% in a normal kind of competitive commercial world. An architect might get about half of that, depending. You know, architecture and landscape, depending on how much, and if they're doing interiors as well. The key to the lead consultants, let's call them, architects, engineers and interiors, maybe 50%, and the sub-consultants share the rest. If there's a project manager in there, they'll probably get almost as much as the darn architect. If there's a real estate agent selling your building, they'll probably get paid more than you. So think carefully about your career, just teasing.
Oh dear.
Sorry, I interrupted that lovely person asking a question.
Yes.
So, no issues. No, actually, on the topic of fees, I think Kate had mentioned that early on she went into the work with a sort of an idealistic sort of angle, and the client took advantage of a firm in many ways. So I think even when I've done some freelance work, and many of my friends have done freelance work, a lot of the times the client has taken advantage of us and avoided payments, even tried getting work for free. So what would be your advice in how we should approach our clients in a sort of a professional way, and be taken seriously when we approach them? So yeah.
Go for it.
Could I answer that, Emma?
Go for it. I thought you were saying one answer. Sorry.
No, I got to a point in my career where we were working on $1 billion project, and it was prior to the GFC, and the client was starting to run out of money because the banks were foreclosing on him, and he was a small client doing a big project, and I was our team were the master architects and doing a couple of buildings in each stage, and he was asking me for the drawings, insisting on getting the drawings for the subsequent stage of drawings for which he hadn't paid. So what we wrote on the drawings, right across them in quite big grey, was awaiting client approval. And we issued to them like that. Now, this guy was an extremely tough cat. He was bipolar, really hardcore, very, very difficult, very, very smart guy. But having done that, because I predicted what he was going to do, a trick that clients use for not paying. It's a very common trick. You give them the drawings, they like them, but they say they don't. They say you haven't answered the brief, so they don't pay. And they ask you to fiddle with this and change that. All they're really doing is trying to avoid paying. So my great big patch across the drawing saying awaiting client approval, I said, Doug, well, shouldn't mention his name. I said, as soon as you approve these drawings, and pay for them, I will take that off. And guess what he did? Because he couldn't use them. He was embarrassed by my drawings, or our drawings, sorry, based on what it said. So he approved them in writing, and we took it off and got paid. So you've got to play hardball. Another lesson I learned, I was negotiating with some cultures. You think it's going to cause a fight, some clients, but some cultures see it as sport. And in fact, business is a game. We don't see it that way. We see it as a way of getting paid for what we love doing. But our clients mostly are interested in as a game. How much can they ask you to do? For how little can they pay you? That's the game. That's what they're out for. And we architects, like Kate said, it's a wonderful opportunity. Let's really rock their socks off and don't worry about the money, because we're all like that, okay? They're playing a different game. So playing hardball is a healthy way of getting respect. And I've learned over my career, one of the first things to do in a meeting is talk about money first. And then everyone can relax. And if they don't want to pay money, you're wasting your time anyway. So you may as well leave that meeting.
Or you've agreed that it's a pro bono thing because it's something you want to do. And then we all, there will be times when you will offer to do something for free because you've decided it's good, it's a good initiative and you're going to back it regardless of the cost. But you can't run your entire business doing pro bono projects. So, and they should, and some clients, as Ken said, will treat it like you're happy to work for them like you would a charity. And a developer is not a charity organisation, so we should never feel obliged to do work for them for free.
Can I, since this is professional practice, I will remind all the young architects that irrespective of what you get paid for preparing a drawing or a design, does not relieve you in any way of your full liability. The fact that you did it for free changes nothing. So please be careful. The other thing that Kate just mentioned, developers, in my career I've seen many ask us to do a design because they're experimenting, right? They're looking at sites and they're trying to work out what can go on it, and they're doing that all day long, and they say, oh look, can you knock me up a little scheme? Because they're trying to work out what will fit on it, how many apartments. Can you knock me up a little scheme, or how much beautiful landscape will go in there? And it's like, and if we get it over the line, it's your job. Oh yeah, okay. Then they do that the 5th time because they're not getting it over the line. And you're going, oh, well, you know what? This is kind of costing us money. How about we get like a small amount of money for doing these concepts for you, or these visos? Bingo, gone. On to the next architect. So I think you have to be extremely, now it's understandable what they're doing, because until they buy a block of land, build on it and sell it, until they sell it, all the money is coming out of their pocket. So they're trying to find ways to reduce money coming out of their pocket until such time as they've sold every last apartment is when they get the profit. So what we do nowadays is say, oh, so you want us to do that for free? We understand that you're trying to keep your costs down. Our fees would be this, let's say 50 grand, 100 grand, whatever it is, whatever the job is, even if it's $5,000 for something that you're helping someone do a dual lock on, say, I'm putting my fees in as equity in your project. When you come out the back end, you're probably aiming to make 30%. I would like 30% on my fees, thank you very much. And it's the equivalent of equity in the deal is what you have to see your work as. It is not free. It's worth something. Find a way of the developer valuing it. You take a risk with them. But if there's risk, there should be uplift. It's better than fighting with them and trying to get a tiny bit of money that they don't want to pay you, and they eventually don't pay you. If you trust that developer and get a decent, let's say, some kind of agreement that you think they might stick to, maybe you'll make a profit out of it.
Good advice. Over the years, we have had developers offer to pay us cash, groceries. One was going to pay us in groceries. because he was a big supermarket owner. I said, I can't give my staff groceries. They need money to pay
Can't
their
eat that
rent.
many bananas.
Yes. You know, they will buy anything. So you do have to be firm. Yeah. We have ransomed our drawings. We have done work and said we are not delivering it until you pay us, because some developers are so bad. There was one we did a project with and we said, we're never working with you again because you don't pay. And they said, don't worry, we'll be better next time. And we said, fine, you have to pay us up front next time because you're just too unreliable. Yep.
Yeah, overseas work, we don't do it, depending on where it is. But any overseas jurisdiction where we think we can't, where we wouldn't bother going for a court case, and that's just about everywhere, then we don't start until half the fee of each stage is in our bank and cleared.
Yeah. And
we thought that would be the end of jobs, but actually some cultures really respect you playing hardball because they like a tough game.
Yeah.
And it's transparency, you know.
Yeah.
Upfront.
And as Kate says, you've got to pay the rent, pay the staff. Like, what do they think's going on here?
We spoke this morning a little bit about pay equity and the importance of actually having that conversation and being open about your worth. And so it's the same situation at a practice level, I think. Don't give yourselves away for free. Yeah. But one of the questions that came out of this morning, and I was hoping maybe either Kate or Ken can talk about it, but you know, as your practice is growing and you're getting larger scales of work, what is the role of ISO accreditation? Like, is that something that you choose to do, or is that something that is required at a particular scale of practice and operation? Could you guide me on that one? Yeah.
From our side, for us, it was a choice. Types of projects that we wanted to be able to do, and that was state government projects. So there's a huge myriad of state government projects out there at the moment. If you think about things like football stadiums, hospitals, university projects, not university projects, hospitals, primary schools, public schools, infrastructure. These are state government projects, and they are good to have in your mix of projects because they tend to need to be delivered. Like, they're essential infrastructure. That's why they're being managed by the state government. And they come with a lot more process than some other types of projects. And you do need to demonstrate that you're capable of not just coming up with a good design and producing the drawings, but managing the process so that the government knows they're getting value for money, they're getting a design that's not going to have any issue, that is going to be compliant and buildable. So that's where ISO comes in. It's a demonstrated process for managing design deliverables. It can feel like a lot of extra process on top of the job of making the drawings to get the job built. But it's useful when things do go wrong. So if you're at a point in the future where something has gone wrong and someone's tripped over and hurt themselves at the finished project, you can go back through all of that documentation and demonstrate that you did your due diligence, you did check everything properly, you did get things certified, and that this little trip hazard that's resulted is a construction error, not a design error. So it's really important, I think, on some of those types of projects that you do have that assurance. You don't need it to do all kinds of work though, and it is a little onerous. So I think it's about project scale and studio scale. Sorry, Anne.
Yes, because on your time scale, it was not until you were around 43, 55 people that you chose to go into that, which was interesting. So, for architects who might be going out and doing a small practice sort of quite soon after uni, is ISO worth it, or is it?
Could I comment on that?
Extra cost and time that you don't need? I don't. Yeah.
That was a really lovely answer from Kate. I've got kind of another reflection on it. I've never wanted to have a big practice, but I've always wanted to do big projects. So there's different studios I've been in have always collaborated with big grunty firms that do have ISO. And I made a policy pretty early that we wouldn't really chase the delivery of government jobs because of all that bureaucracy. And that was a little bit influenced by working with a big Australian firm on some educational buildings, and we were collaborating with them in their studio, and we had butter paper drawings everywhere. We'd worked out a whole lot of stuff, and we came in the next morning, all the butter paper was gone. Turns out they were being, what do you call it, Kate? They were being audited that day. And so someone whipped around the office and chucked away anything that didn't have a very clear status, or I don't know what their decision, Kate would probably tell you why, but all the butter paper was gone. Our project work was gone. And that was down to quality accreditation. And I thought, oh my God, this doesn't work. So anyway, that's a bit of just a side yarn, but how it can go terribly, terribly wrong. But yes, in short, ISO is really important. Quality is really important. We collaborate with people who have those things in place.
I think what we learned is you want an ISO system that works for your company. And so you have to tune it to suit your process. So, for example, yellow trace is not banned from our process because it's necessary to how we work. But an engineer's version of ISO is probably the most extreme version of ISO. Whereas the design-focused practice, we want flexibility, we want room to do things our way, but we also need to know people are going to check things. Sorry, I've got a bit of a cough. I'll just mute for a bit.
No, that's answered this morning's questions. That's great. So just find a buddy who's got the grunt and lean on them, I think. Are there any other questions from students?
I have a question for Ken around your introduction to, I guess, your work was that you sort of started really big and then you worked down to become doing these small projects that I guess probably touch you or move you. What sort of advice would you give if we all idealistically want to do the projects that move us without any sort of capital behind us? I guess you can maybe do the pro bono projects now, thinking you probably have experience and savings and contacts and relationships with other people. What advice would you give if we wanted to try and start to work into that world now as young practicing architects?
That's a nice question, Hannah. I wouldn't assume that it has to be pro bono. I choose to do them depending on who asks me pro bono, but we also do remote area housing stuff and get paid for it. It just does really depend on the organisation. But what I've learned over my career is when I first came back from Piano's office, I was so moved by what I'd learned and felt so much gratitude for the opportunity I'd had that I wanted to pay it forward. So I actually spent 6 years with another Aussie I met in Piano's office researching Indigenous housing. We measured the last remaining tin camp that was self-built in New South Wales in Gaduga. And that 6 years, self-funded, absolutely drained every bit of bonus we ever got at Piano's office, and we were well paid there. Just by the way, when I got my job in Paris, I was earning pounds in the UK. I got asked how much I wanted to get paid, and I was expecting to work for free. So it was not a question I was expecting to answer. And I was sitting there across the desk from this grumpy business guy, and I did a calculation from English pounds to Australian dollars into French francs and put a number on the table, and his jaw dropped a little bit. And I thought, and then he said, okay. And I thought, oh, I must have got it just right then. I'd realised sometime later, maybe one of the reasons a lot of the snooty foster people and others in the office didn't talk to me, I made a gross miscalculation. I was getting paid about double what I wanted. Anyway, so I lost all that money over 6 years of self-funded research. And now I've realised what I've got to do if I want to help people at scale, those who need it most, I've actually got to make a really profitable business. So now we do commercial work and we charge like an absolute wounded bull to pay for the projects with heart that we do. But you're asking a very specific question. It's the same. I learned that trick from Paul Folleros. He did high-end houses for Northern Beaches people, and therefore that funded his health habitat work he did in Indigenous. So I think it's a balance. But you must balance carefully, or else if you're not managing to have a profitable practice, then you can't give much, can you? And that's what I've learned. It's taken me a career to learn that.
Probably stemming from, Paul also influences, I guess, what I want to do with architecture. I was fortunate enough to learn from Paul when he was teaching in Newcastle and taking the first studios to Nepal. He really struggled with the life balance because he just put 100% into both avenues, both his paid work and his pro bono work.
Yes.
And perhaps worked himself to death.
But what a difference he made. And to us all, right? He was the first person I went to visit when I came back from Europe.
Yeah, beautiful.
He showed me his ladder up into his house in the trees, and he said, if a client isn't happy to climb that ladder, they're not a client of mine.
Fantastic.
What a lovely man. Anyone who doesn't know all about Paul Folleros, please look at the YouTube videos on the work that guy's done for our country, for our people, First Nations people.
Thanks, Ken.
And I don't know if that's helped really. I don't know what to say apart from it doesn't have to be pro bono. You could look for practices. Like I know that Arup and Lend-Lease, for example, the big firms, they have enough money, they make enough profit to turn a certain part of it, like lawyers do, some lawyers, enough back into the industry or the community. And if you find a successful commercial practice, you may find that they'll let you do work pro bono. But the commercial practice that I worked for made us do it after hours. We did quite a few projects with heart that some of my colleagues, my principals, are very unhappy about. And when I spoke to the young people who kept asking me, are there more projects we could do? And I said, you're going to get me into trouble. We're not meant to be working on these. You're meant to be doing your day job, making money, doing big train lines and freeways and towers and shit. And they said, Ken, you don't understand. When we do these projects with you after hours, we have more energy during the day, not less. And these were the most talented architects, young architects in the office who were saying this to me. I really learned a lot about that I understand, and it motivates me, and I'm glad to say it motivates a lot of the talent that I'm talking to here today. So that would be one way. Find a firm that is aligned with your values, because I do think that is the biggest disruption that is coming in our industry, that you guys should only choose to work for companies that are aligned with your values. And if you care about the kind of things that you've been mentioning, the Paul Folleros factor, the projects with heart, we call them, find a company who does that and go work for them, because they're likely to be good people.
Thank you.
Kate?
Yeah, I would say, and I think for us, the balance has always been around how we choose projects that are going to align with our purpose. Our purpose is to design places that make a difference for people in the environment, as a short summary. So if that's the lens through which we are choosing projects, that does knock a whole lot of projects out of contention straight up. How we then stay commercially viable while being true to that purpose is always the challenge. How do we find, often we're delivering public projects that are developer projects. Some of the most interesting pieces of public space we've designed have been for companies like Lend-Lease. And it's through understanding that that is often the avenue. You need a client who has some money and good values, and there are some good developers. and then you can work with them to deliver great things and feel good about the work that you're doing every day, and not have to do extra nice things late at night as well. We do pro bono projects as well, and we do them for a variety of reasons, and we generally do them for organisations that couldn't ever afford to pay design fees, preschools and places like that. And I generally find that the staff are always very excited to be, have the opportunity to do a pro bono project, and we prioritise time during work hours for them to do that, so that you can share that as well, because if it's only happening at night, the rest of the studio doesn't get to see it. So I think it's important that companies give time, proper time, for people to work on pro bono projects, and that directors support that by sharing their experience. So often a pro bono project might be something that you say to a young person in the studio, would you like to work on this? This will be a good experience for you, but I will back you up. I will give you the the benefit of my experience to make sure that it happens properly. But aligning projects with your purpose, I think, is really important. And as individuals, you need to work out what your purpose is. What do you want to be achieving as designers? What's important to you? And therefore, how do you make choices that align with that purpose as best you can? You all need to make enough money to live off as well. So how do you, find the types of people who are delivering there? Oh, I just realised the chat does work. I didn't know how to get that to work on Zoom. Thanks, Ken.
I agree, Ken.
Yeah, can I ask a favour? This is a rare opportunity. Emma tells me there's normally 60 or 80 people on the call. Everyone, please ask a question. Come on, we don't bite. It's fun. Please practice. You've got to learn to speak up as an architect. You've got to be curious. You've got to learn how to find stuff out. Malvika, your turn to ask a question. I'm going to dob on everyone. I'm going across the grid here. Malvika's next. Question?
Hey, hi. I don't have any question yet, but the way you were saying that working for a big practice and small practice, when I graduated in India, I always chose a medium-sized practice or a small-sized practice to work for, because one of the senior told me, oh, don't go for the big one because you will end up doing toilet design or something like that and doing
Yes.
one detail. And I still think that's really true, because when you go for a bigger firm, there's a hierarchy of team leader, associate, director, architect. And then when I worked for someone, it was just the architect and me. So he was giving me the work he was doing, and I was getting to talk to clients and things like that. So I'm looking for someone to, go for a small practice, and yeah, obviously on the same levels. But yeah, I don't have any question. But yeah,
Malvika, could I reflect on what you just said?
Yeah.
That was the normal thing in architecture in Australia that I expected. So I thought when I got a job in Piano's office that I would start in the basement and work my way up, just like you said, doing toilets and stuff. To my surprise, I was put on the best part of the best project. Now, that's because it's an office that valued my difference.
Yeah.
I was this funny Aussie. I knew how to build things. So I was given a chance. Everyone was given a chance. Yeah. So I'm going to suggest to you, it's not the size of the practice, it's the culture. And ever since then, I've tried to set up, and Kate's the same, I think most good designers are the same, we value your difference. The best time I've ever had is when I had people who couldn't even speak English because they would try and express themselves, and some other person who didn't speak English very well misunderstood it and said something, and that was a great idea that no one ever thought of. And it was all through complete misunderstanding.
Yeah.
So but we set up a culture to value ideas. It doesn't matter where they come from, Malvika. So please find an office, irrespective of the scale, where they care about ideas, not hierarchy.
Yeah. Can I reflect on that?
Yeah.
So
who's speaking? Oh, Malvika's got it. Yeah. Okay.
Maybe.
Mirini. Oh, that's a double overhead whammy. Okay.
I'm the opposite of Maverica. After graduating, I worked in Sydney for smaller and had a not a bad experience, but kind of thought, no, that's not really where I think I should be going. I should be going big. But I actually think you just saying it's not actually the size at all, that's the solution. It can literally be any size, but you're actually targeting.
Because Kate just explained to you, Kate's making teams, right? And so you get yourself in a team with, and the tip I got was to get myself in Norio Cabby's team, okay? So you do your homework and find out, most offices run more or less like Kate's. They make teams. It's not 90 people doing one project, okay? So you find out which team you want to be in and you go and apply for that job. You don't make the mistake I made and go and ask for the boss. That's not going to happen. Yeah? Get to know someone. Get to know someone on the team that you want to work for. Ring them up, go see them, have a coffee, find out what floats their boat.
That's very smart.
And then contact the person who's running that team, not the bloody big boss. Now, eventually the boss will probably have to approve, or someone up there will have to approve your job, your application. But find out what they're doing and decide whether you actually want to be part of it before you waste your time.
Yeah, I actually know someone who told me that she got hired from some other team, and then when she started job, she started working with other team, and they were doing different projects, and she just hated the whole experience. She was doing it for 3 years, and I'm telling her, stop it, don't do it. But then, yeah, she just kept on doing it, and yeah.
Yeah, people. It is a fact of commercial practice that you get moved around, and I showed you the West Connects vent stack projects, those big tunnels and all that stuff that no one wanted to work on. So I got given that job, and it was something no one wanted. So there were 1,000 people in the office, 9 studios, and I had to find people that other principals didn't really want in their team, right? So they were the junior people, or they were not very good at this or not very good at that or not experienced, whatever. I took them because we weren't allowed to employ new people. We had to insource or whatever. I took them and gave them each a component of the project. And Kate mentioned what a project office is like. We were out at way away from the head office, out near the airport, in a side office, 3 floors of engineers, tunnel engineers who worry about bloody great big tunnels. And we were this little team of architects without much experience, just me and all these young people, and each one of them I sent in to the meetings.
How hard was it to dominate the engineers?
It was perfect, because what I didn't realize is the grumpy engineers then became the helpful uncle, and they shared their knowledge and they coached my young people who knew nothing. And I've never done a fucking road or event stack, so I didn't know anything either. And we were designing substations and God knows what. It's like, how are we going to do this? Well, it worked. All these young people were being coached by the engineers. And because the relationship was so good, guess what happened then? The smart young people went, oh, so you're trying to make it cheaper and smaller. What if we got these? I didn't even know what they were. The young people worked it out. What if we got these turbo boosting, charging fucking big bits of information, and instead of doing it like you're drawing, how about we do it like this, and it gets smaller and you'll be able to maintain it better? And these grumpy old engineers are going, oh, yeah. my guys and girls got to redesign all the grunty infrastructure, and we got all the glowing boxes and the bloody filigree stuff because we were saving money for these grumpy engineers. And those young graduates started saying to me, this is the most enjoyable job they've ever done. They wanted to stay there till the very end, and because we were out of the head office where they weren't valued much, and we kicked butt.
That's good.
Ken, can I ask, is the reason that nobody wanted to work on West Connects because of the nature of the project, or was it like a moral opposition to the?
Yeah, same with me. I didn't want to work on roads, and it was a horrible, they were bulldozing bloody great swathes of inner city. They were making massive spaghetti junctions that I happened to know that my landscape colleagues at Hassel, at the very beginning of that project, showed alternative. This is being recorded, isn't it? Anyway, there were way better ways of doing things that in the early stages of that project that were not accepted, that would have saved simple ideas like the tunnel dives are side by side, right? Which means there's 4 roads side by side, because going up north and south and up and down, that meant you had to demolish a lot of houses. The really clever colleagues at Hassel staggered the dives, which meant it was like 2 or 3 lanes, 3 I think, and so we didn't have to demolish so many houses. Guess what? They didn't care. They said, no, we want to change the design. The massive spaghetti intersection at Roselle, they worked out a way of doing that cheaper with less ground, with less terrain. Nah, it didn't matter. It was pretty kind of, it was a hard project, but it's so big, we decided let's do this. We've got to do it properly. We've got to make the best of it. So that was the idea about taking the fences away and turning them into green space, and turning the buildings into the secure line rather than having a separate fence. But it was the fact that we gave each person a component of that project. There were like, I don't know, 10 vent stacks and 50 buildings, you know, and each person got a couple of buildings or a site, and they that's why all the vent stacks, there's a range of different ones. They were guiding principles, but I let them design them.
Kate, did you have something? No?
I think I just wanted to add something about about successfully being recruited, I suppose. And it's back to Ken's point about doing your research. And you're coming into a time where there's going to be lots of graduates going for a small amount of jobs. So it's extra difficult. And the candidates that stand out, so my job is review all of the candidates and pick the ones that are going to be best for us, are people who've written an individual letter to somebody in my organisation. It doesn't have to be me, but often people write to the directors. But pick somebody, find out enough about them and a project that they've worked on to write to them individually and say, dear so-and-so, I'd like to be considered for a role in your organisation because, and go to a project and be able to comment on a project is really important. So you need to demonstrate that you think you're a good fit for the company because of something that you've learnt about the company. You can't just say, I'm a graduate and I have these skills. Here's my beautiful renderings, hire me. You really need to demonstrate that you understand something about the company, its values, what it demonstrates through its built work, or if it doesn't have built work, what it demonstrates through its online work, etc. So I think that's my one bit of advice, is to try and make every application personal.
No, that's great. And, you know, for myself, shared experience, I didn't have the amazing renders, so I needed to find another way. And I think that for me, it was about being able to have a conversation about the practice and wanting to understand how they communicate or how the teams work. And if you show that you are curious to know more and want to learn from them, a bit like what Kirsten was saying this morning, it's not necessarily what's in the folio. It's about this desire and curiosity and how you'll fit in their team to grow. I think is really important, and making that quite explicit.
Could I add to that? My interview with Nori Akabi was entirely around what Joey kangaroos do when they're born. Nothing about architecture. He didn't ask me a single question. He said he was fascinated in his heavy Japanese accent about kangaroos, and I talked at length, it seems, about the fact that they're born and they crawl up through the phone, yada, yada, yada. He said, yeah, right, you can have a job. So, okay. Bizarre. But
you're the right one.
I also wanted to answer that writing the letter is only the beginning. How many letters, please imagine, how many letters will be sitting on Kate's desk? So then what happens? Yours is going to go down and down because every day she's getting 10, or every week, whatever. So in about 2 weeks' time, guess where yours will be? The bottom of the pile. So how are you going to stand out? Well, my friend Christian from the country in Alsace, he'd fallen in love. He'd done his homework. He wanted to work with Bernard Tschumi in Paris, 1,000 k's away or 800 k's away. He wrote the letter and rang once a week for maybe once a fortnight. I don't know. You decide how annoying you want to be. I think it took him 8 months. But at the moment that Bernard Tschumi needed someone, guess who was front of bloody mind? Christian, the kid from the country who was ringing every bloody week. So keep yourself on the top of the pile, keep yourself front of mind, because things happen in an instant. The number of people I've employed based on the last phone call I've made, because if you have a good office, you'll get top applications all the time. So then it's the last person who called you who said, have you got a job yet? Yes, I do. Walk in, come now, bingo, start, sit down, let's go. So please follow up. Don't assume the letter is going to sit there and get you a job. It won't.
No.
It's just something they refer to when you ring up.
Also drop in. We've hired people because they've dropped in, hand-delivered a portfolio. Actually, we've hired quite a few people because they've made the effort to hand-deliver.
And you'd be amazed the number of people I've done the same with, Kate, who walk in at just after I put down the phone and I'm panicking. How am I going to do this job with this team? Someone walks through the door. Folio looks good. Have you had lunch? No. Go and have lunch. Come back. Start there. Totally.
So always be ready, guys.
And ask for something that they'll say, yes, can I buy you a coffee? Just say, can I have 10 minutes? Don't ask for a job. Just ask for coffee.
One of the things that we spoke about this morning was the importance of transferable skills. So, you know, if you have worked in hospitality, you know, hospitality it's about social interaction and how you present yourself and how you greet and making that effort in the presentation and the follow-up or the phone call or taking the time to follow up says a lot about your character and how you will work in the studio. You know, you'll be great working with a client. You'll be on top of things. You'll follow things up. Like, we will read into your presentation in understanding how those behaviours might transfer. So, hence why we've given you 3-minute video pitch as an exercise. Yeah.
If you're a shy person and you're not into hospitality, what are you into? Are you good at making things, or are you good with coding or something? Find someone. Just be proud of what you're good at and really go for that, and find someone who values it.
Yeah, that's nice. I think the other day, Kate, you were talking about a kind of ecosystem of personality types.
Yeah, it's really important to us that we don't just hire the most extroverted people, because we've learnt over time that you need people of all personality types to make a successful office. And often quieter people who don't feel as confident to speak up immediately are the deeper thinkers. So they'll be the ones processing something more slowly, but maybe they'll solve a more complex issue. So we know we need, you know, all types of people, and people from different backgrounds. We hire people from all over the world because we know that we care about having a global perspective. We don't just want to have an Australian view on how we solve issues here. So we're always looking at international applicants with a lot of interest. We've never had someone from Iran before. That'd be interesting. What, perspective are they going to bring? That was probably the most interesting thing about when we had to hire 15 people all at once for the light rail project, is the diversity of people that we were able to hire. And it was amazing. And we really enjoyed that. And it brought much greater depth, I think, to how we do things. So that ecosystem of personalities and diversity of background, like country of background, languages you speak, where you grew up, what your influences are, but also what you studied. We hire people from lots of different design backgrounds. We have industrial designers, landscape architects, urban designers. Our core is landscape architecture, but we would have in amongst our staff probably 1/3 who are not landscape architecture graduates. There's some other design profession. We particularly like architects who come across to the green side. So we're always...
We had a moment in our team at Aspect where we're like, oh, we should get a landscape architect in our team.
We need someone who knows about plants, yes. And I think that's a sign of good leadership as well. You want to work for a company that has diverse leadership. If it's a bunch of people all from one background or all from one discipline, unfortunately, you know, it's going to be harder for the company to have that kind of, you know, openness to diversity.
Mm. Yeah. Alex.
I have a question.
Just about funding. You guys are talking about like supplementing not for profit work or kind of more altruistic work with profit driven architecture. And I just kind of wonder where, and it's a personal, I guess, evaluation, but where the line you draw is when you say no to a job because it doesn't align with personal ideology. Are you like, is it like strict utility in that you're like, well, this is going to benefit the largest amount of people down the line, even if I engage with a client in which I don't agree where they get their funding from, or you know, the nature of the project, I don't agree with how it's going to function in public space, but that's going to give me money to do better things? Or is, yeah, where's the line for your practice when you say no?
No, I don't know that we'll have the same answer. And I'm part of a bigger company, so I have to think about, as a director, making decisions for the benefit of not just the Sydney practice, but making sure the Sydney practice stays economically viable so that we don't put a burden on the other practices. But I think for me, Alex, it's always about, is this a good project that aligns with our purpose? If it's not, we're not going near it. And we do try and do a bit of digging into, if it's a new client and we've never worked with them before, we'll try and research them and find out as much as we can about them. Because no one wants the surprise of finding out they're working on a project and the client is of whatever, an oil baron, and that's, you know. We got tricked into working on a Meriton project once, and I was furious. We were engaged by the planners, and the planners told us it was somebody else, and they procured our fees and they contracted us, and then afterwards we found out it was Meriton. And look, I'm not mean to be mean about Meriton, but they don't value landscape, and they were awful. So we did that one job and never worked with them again.
I think you are still muted, Ken.
Yes, sorry. We got invited to do 3 towers on the Gold Coast after an award-winning one there. And we asked them straight out, are you just using us so you can get approval by the City Council, use our good name, or do you actually want to do better work than you have been? And they said, no, the first. Thank you, bye. Alex, it's always going to be a personal question. We ask the client, we probe as much as possible, what are their ambitions for the project? Why are they doing it? And if it is just money, then it is not design they're after. Now, they may not be honest, but at least there's a record of what it is. And we actually record the project ambitions. And any time that anyone on the team, including the client, is diverging from those project ambitions, we have it recorded why we're all doing this. Now, if you can't get an honest answer with integrity from them, I would consider very carefully not to work with them, because we have limited time. If you get busy on a mongrel job, it's preventing you from doing a good one. Now, it is scary because we've all got to pay the bills, but I think if you just let bad projects go, good ones will come. And there's another very important principle. As soon as you start doing ordinary work, that's what everyone will ask you to do. I've got friends I went to uni with who had mortgages and debts and I don't know what, and so they started doing bathroom renovations, and to this date, they still are. and they don't understand why I get to do the cool stuff I'm doing. And it's because I never let myself do anything ordinary. I just didn't. I was an academic. I found I don't own houses, you know, like I've only just bought a decent car. Like I didn't burden myself with things that made me do crap work.
Yeah, because I guess.
How many motorbikes have you got, Ken?
About 8.
They're much cheaper than cars.
Yeah, they are.
Where you have a body of work now that you can kind of leverage in order to kind of get those works, is kind of what you're saying, Ken. I guess starting out looking for a project which will, and you know, I'm not necessarily thinking of starting my own firm, but just if I were starting out looking for a project which would be of kind of, not of note, but something that's interesting. There's always difficulty in kind of a trade-off between maybe your desires and the outcome, and kind of, yeah, just the projects on offer to new studios are quite often limited in scope. And so now, like now that you're more established, I guess you can leverage the previous works that you have done. It's just starting out, kind of what you say no to it's hard to say no.
Alex, I'm going to pull you up there, mate. Whatever you're given, if you choose to do it, smash it out of the damn park like Kate did, okay? And you'll build a reputation. If you're given a renovation to do, take it on if the client wants, if their ambitions is for remarkable design. Do the renovation, but smash it out of the park. If their ambitions are ordinary, don't do ordinary. It's not about the scale, and it's the same thing when you get a job in an office. You might be given the damn toilets to do or the car park ramp, but smash it out of the park so you'll get asked to do something more interesting next time. Don't sit there and whinge that you've got an ordinary job or you're doing the toilets or the only job you can get is some because I'm new or something. It's kind of true, but it's a choice of what you do with the opportunity. Every opportunity to build is a very, very rare one. We mustn't squander it. Choose them wisely and smash them out of the park.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yeah. Sure, no, definitely.
Look at Michael, who's doing the decks of skateboards. Like, that's going to put people notice that stuff. Michael Chapman is doing drawings on skateboards. He's doing really cool stuff.
Didn't know.
Pardon?
I didn't know that.
Yeah, well, we're going to buy them. They're only $80 or something for a skateboard deck. Like, just use your talent for something. We're designers. Be creative. Don't assume you just got to go down a normal path. Yes, have fun.
So what happens if everything seemed great at the start, the client was totally on board, yes, you've got, you're on this project, but then partway through you realise it's turned to crap and you want out, either as a practice or as a small sole practitioner? Like, what?
I can talk to that one.
Yeah, how do you do that?
So we had a project where we thought we shared the values of the client, or they shared our values. We thought it was going to be a good project, but it totally went to crap, and they wanted to put a whole lot of things in an ecologically sensitive area. And we felt very firmly that was the wrong thing to do. They were obliged to hire an ecologist who told them it was a bad thing to do. And we said to them, see, the ecologist agrees, we can't do this, we need a different outcome. But they were hell-bent on doing this. So they hired another ecologist and somehow strong-armed them into writing a report that supported what they wanted. And at that point, we just had to say, we can't continue with you. This is not going in a direction that we can support. And it was a huge project and it was a lot of fees, but we walked away. And we felt very happy about doing that. Because I think afterwards it ended up in the Land Environment Court for doing something dodgy. So there will be times, unfortunately, where things do not eventuate the way you want, and you have to make a decision about whether or not you're going to continue with it or whether you're going to walk away from it. we've never worked with that client since, and it's a really big client organisation. So they pretty much, you know, we burnt that bridge. But in hindsight, that was okay. It was a bridge that was okay to burn.
Yeah, great. Questions from the group? Ken, I'm going to pretend I'm Ken. Just one more question, and then I think maybe we can let our guests go. I'm going to say Stephen. How are you, Stephen? Stephen there? Peter? Katish?
Hey Emma, I'm here.
Hi. Thanks
How are you?
Thanks for joining. Yeah, well, thank you.
Actually, I'm so sorry to attend it late. It just skipped from the mind because pretty not conscious about the week held last week. So, so sorry about that.
No, that's okay. But do you have a question for practice, for practitioners?
Actually, I just look for it in some time. Yeah, you can go forward.
Sorry?
You can move forward.
You can move forward. All right. Well, look, maybe we will wrap up the Q&A. But thank you so much, Ken and Kate. That was an awesome discussion. I have in front of me like a list of questions that students have asked over the time. And, you know, we've ticked off a lot today, which was really what I was hoping for. So thank you for helping me run the course. This has been really insightful just to kind of get into the nitty gritty of practice and some really useful tips for students, not only for the assignment, but also to boost their confidence and get them excited about, you know, starting their careers and doing it with gusto, but also with an informed mind. So really appreciate seeing you both and hearing your presentations. We'll see you soon. Kate, I'll see you up here.
Thanks for the great lineup. Thanks for the great lineup, Emma.
Yes.
They were great presentations, guys. Thank you.
Yeah.
No problem. No, look, it was a pleasure. Thank you, guys. See you later.
The important thing, since this is a professional course, is to acknowledge that since it's Friday afternoon, it's now time for Friday afternoon drinks.
I should ride over now.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Have a beer in.
Yeah, look, for the practice people, I'll see you in week 9. We've got a Friday session booked in, but you know me, I'll hit you up with announcements and emails during the break, and shoot me any questions if you've got any concerns about the assignment, but hopefully it's all pretty self-explanatory. And I think today's presentations probably reassure you that it's an important exercise to do. So take time and dream big with preparing your proposals. Have a lovely weekend and safe break for those who get 2 weeks break. And thank you. Ciao.